Next, let's talk about names when you're using attribute routing. Let's go ahead and take our route for food and go ahead and comment it out. And we're going to convert this to using attributes, just so we can see what more of a real-world case for this and where some of the problems can lie, especially when we start to look at the way that names are used. So to convert our foods controller, let's go ahead and give it a prefix. Just like we had before, it's going to be API nutrition foods. So this will be our standard prefix for our individual calls. We only have a couple of calls, so it shouldn't be that difficult. We're going to go ahead and create a route here for the get, and notice that the get is empty but allows two parameters that have default values. Because these are default values, we're using them in the query string, and we don't need to accommodate that in the route. So we can simply say route empty in order to get at this, because this is going to be essentially the same as when we call the foods. We also need a route down here in our second route, and this is where we're going to get an individual item, and we'll go ahead and give it a route of food ID, again matching the name of the parameter here. And we could do int if we wanted to make sure that there was constraint. Because we don't need a constraint, I tend to not put them on the routes unless you need them for differentiation. And so now that we have those, let's go ahead and build our project, and let's go over to nutrition. And we run into this error that says a route named food could not be found in the route collection. Well, we did comment out our route here from the route collection. Who's actually looking for this? If we dive down into the stack trace, we're actually seeing that the API controller is attempting to get this name somehow. What's actually happening for us is that when we're generating this code, we're using the name of the route in a couple of places. We're using it in our URL helper in order to create links for us, and we're also using it pretty schematically in our model factory. Let's look at this create call in our model factory. We can see that we're using the URL helper here with the name of food in order to create our link. So we have to have a route named food that we're going to match here. And the way we can do this is on the controller, since this is the route that we're trying to match, we can add as a named parameter the name of this route. By naming this route, our model factory will be able to find that as a named route, and then use it in order to construct this URL helper. If we refresh this now that we have the name food in there, let's see what happens. Now we're getting the foods generated, and we're getting the URLs for the foods generated correctly. The URLs for the measures still work because we still have top-level routes for measures defined in the Web API config file, right? But this is being generated directly from our attributed route. Great. Almost. We're actually missing the href of our next page. And why is that? Let's go back and look. In the food controller, when we put together our list, we're doing a previous and next link. And we're expecting it to take us to the food route. Because we don't have a specific name of a route for an entire controller like we used to, we actually need to have a separately named route here that points to this route. Because this is the route we're trying to create a URI for. So just like before, if we come in here and give it, and I'll say food, since it's the collection of food as the name of the route, and then change it foods in both of these places, we'll be able to see that the URL helper is going to construct these URIs for us in the correct way. This is going to the natural foods one, and this is going to the one with the ID embedded in it. And so to convert our foods controller over, or our other controllers, we're going to have to make sure we have these named routes and make the changes where we've used the names in the correct way. The difference here is we're no longer mapping to the name of a route that is specific for a controller, but is actually specific to an individual method on a controller. This is a big change in the way you sort of think about it. You might think, why don't they just allow us to specify a name when we do route prefix? And the problem there is that that route may have these different routes associated with it, but finding one that matches the URIs may not be as trivial, especially since we can now override the patterns in the routes based on those prefixes. So we start to think about routes being routes on individual methods instead of the old way, which was always going to be on an entire controller, unless we created multiple routes per controller, which was much less likely. Often when we think about building these APIs, we think about building a route per controller, but that doesn't always hold up. There's often cases where you're going to need exceptions in your API design to allow this. We'll actually see this next when we dive in and look at how to make the versioning story work.